Right, recently I had challenged to do a 15-minute introduction to conjoint analysis for pricing and product decisions that is digestible for undergraduate students, even in their freshman year. And I only have 15 minutes to do so. So that's what I'm going to try here. So, product and pricing decisions, two of the key marketing instruments. That's where conjoint analysis is most useful, in my opinion. So that's what I'm going to look at. So here you actually see a little screenshot down below. That is actually what a choice task looks like in a conjoint analysis. So conjoint analysis consists of the special type of survey which is then used to fit a demand model, and that can then be used to direct your product and pricing decisions that you may have to take. So typically you have 10 to 20 of these choice tasks, and again, this choice task is a little bit more natural than just asking you a bunch of random questions about what you think about golf balls. Here instead, you are actually given a choice of 3 different golf balls, or you're also given the choice of not buying any of these. They have different prices, different brands, and a performance characteristic. You can add more characteristics to the study if you like, but this is just a simple example here. So that should be very natural, right? So it's like you're standing in front of a store shelf, you see these options, you see their prices, and then you choose the one that you would actually buy. So you do so 10 to 20 times roundabout, and that is then used to fit a demand model. So how is that then going to be useful? So let's get back to the questions we're trying to answer. So maybe you want to determine a profit optimal price. Okay, so that could be for an existing product or for a new product that is yet to be introduced to the market. Maybe something completely new that doesn't exist in the marketplace yet. Or you wonder about configuring products to increase market share. And again, that could be changing products that already exist, and you want to introduce new features to these products or change the features. Or it could be about launching a completely new product. So what do you need to know for this? Well, so if you want to set a price, there are different methods of setting a price. It could be cost-based, so you put a markup on top of your cost. It could be based on the competition, which you're just following, value-based, or goal-directed. And typically, you should be doing goal-directed pricing, so you should try to maximize profits. So how do you do that? Well, you need to understand the demand function that we call Q typically. So you need to understand the relationship between price and demand. And then, okay, if I change the price by a little bit, that's how much demand goes up or down, depending on how you change it. So if you have an understanding of that, then you can actually draw out the demand function. And then if you know what your cost is and how the marginal cost develops as you're producing larger quantities, you can then derive the profit function. And then you can look for the maximum of that profit function, and then there you have your optimal price. So one key ingredient here is to understand what the demand function is. And again, that conjoint survey gives you the data that you put into a demand model that will then allow you to approximate this demand function. Right, so what are some product related questions? Well, if you're producing a hand mixer, should be 5-speed or 7-speed, right? So how much additional value do you get out of a 7-speed? So if you bear that extra cost to make it 7-speed, how many more people are going to buy it, or how much more are they going to spend on it? Or for detergent brand, should they prioritize whiter whites or brighter colors? So those could be relevant questions that you have in R&D as well. So how do we do that? Well, one key ingredient that we need to have for that is we need to understand the so-called part worth. So how much each of these features and feature levels actually contributes to the overall value of the product or the propensity to buy a product. So what could other potential data sources be? So we're just talking about conjoint analysis here, but why do we actually need it? Because there's so many other data sources, right? Well, so this is one way to draw that distinction. Well, so you can make 2 distinctions, basically. So either you don't have an experiment, so you just look at the actual sales data that's already out there, or you have experimental data, where you're kind of controlling the type of offerings that respondents or subjects react to. Well, the other thing is it could be survey-based or sales-based. And so there are pros and cons to each of these quadrants here. So if you don't have an experiment and it's a survey, well, it's a traditional survey, right? And if you look at sales data without an experiment, yeah, well, you just have sales transaction data. It's kind of hard to introduce new products to existing sales data because, well, the products that don't exist yet, they don't have any sales recorded yet. Then in the experimental side, you have conjoint analysis. It's a survey, but it's experimental. So you manipulate which choice alternatives to show to your respondents. And well, ideally you would have sort of a field experiment or pricing experiment in a test market. Those would be actual choices and have an experiment, but of course that would be very costly. So could discuss each of those quadrants a little bit more. Again, sales data, very realistic, but maybe too little variation in price. And again, we will have a hard time talking about new products. Surveys, well, it's great, they can handle new products, but traditional surveys, well, might be quite biased, right? People want a lot of features, but if they're not faced with actual choice alternatives, it may be hard to actually discern what to focus on. So experimental data, of course, would be a little bit better. Field experiments would be ideal, right? Very realistic and accurate, but kind of expensive and maybe also risky if you play around with price too much and then it doesn't work out the way you want it to. Then you maybe have ruined sales in a particular area where your test market is located. So choice experiments are one way out here. It's more realistic than a traditional survey. It allows predicting preferences for many different feature combinations. It's great at dealing with heterogeneity, much better than a traditional survey. The only downside is that those are not actual purchases still, but it's quite predictive of what actual choices would be. So what are the steps in doing conjoint analysis? First, you need to design that study. Then you collect the data, just like in a regular survey. Then you fit a model, and then you apply the model and create predictions. So let's create a new chocolate bar. So how to find a recipe for success here? Well, you can create many different prototypes in the test kitchen, right? You just put it together and then you run taste test. And then you let people rate like the different varieties, and those that are most popular you can actually launch to the market. Well, there are lots of different ingredients you could put into a chocolate bar, so probably it would be easier to sort of escape that curse of combinatorial explosion. So you want to rely on key attributes and make as few simplifying assumptions to get more traction. So you can create what's called a factorial design that helps you to explore the effect of each attribute on preference. So you can then know, okay, how different nuts or different fillings actually affect preference for a chocolate bar. And then respondents are shown realistic choice alternatives as defined by these key attributes, and you're systematic exploring the contribution of each of those ingredients to the overall preference. What's a bit tricky here is to deal with so-called interactions. So maybe some ingredients better work with, let's say, a dark chocolate versus a milk chocolate or white chocolate. And that is something that adds complexity to the model. It's possible as well, but again, it adds a lot of complexity. So here for chocolate, what are some of the key attributes to think about? Well, the brand, of course, the type of chocolate, the nut content, fruit content, and the filling. And whatever else you want to add, maybe there's a completely new set of features that you're thinking about, something special about the packaging that is eco-friendly or something else. You can add that to the choice experiment if that's something you want to explore. And this is what the choice task would actually look like. And again, respondents choose the option they want to choose, or they say they don't find any of these choice alternatives acceptable. So what does the resulting data look like? Well, so in the first few columns, you have identifiers for the choice task and the alternatives, the choice alternatives that is shown to the respondent. Then you have the characteristics of each of these choice alternatives in terms of the attributes that we've defined in the experiment, including the price. And then you're actually recording, which is the actual response, which of these choice alternatives they would actually choose. So that data you can then use to fit a demand model. And again, models are just a representation of something else. They're all by definition wrong, right? And the goal is to make them useful, even though they're wrong, because again, they're making things, they simplify things, but that's actually what we want, because we want to do simulations and predictions. So we don't want to overfit the data, but we want to have a model that is what we say parsimonious. That is a good trade-off between complexity and realism. So that will then help us to understand this demand curve. And if we have our cost structure at hand, we can then optimize our prices. So what type of model do we need to apply here? So if we have discrete choices, so if people only choose one of those choice alternatives, then typically you would use what is called a multinomial logit model. What does that do? Well, it tries to explain how much latent, unobserved utility you can derive from the different choice alternatives. So from the different chocolates that are basically just combinations of different ingredients, like milk chocolate plus nuts. So we try to disentangle the overall utility you have for that chocolate, that overall latent value, and try to back it down into the different attributes. And so each of these attribute levels, each of these features or ingredients that go in, they will receive their so-called part-worth utilities. And of course, it's a model that has an error term as well. Our assumption in this model is that respondents would choose the choice alternative that gives them the most utility. Right? So simple choice rule, choose that alternative that gives you the most utility. And so based on this idea of this model, we can actually fit it to the data that we have collected using our survey. So this is what the choice probabilities would look like, let's say for Milka and the Ritter Sport chocolate, and that's just the mass of the multinomial logit model. And then, of course, everybody's different and has different preferences, and so that's where we typically apply hierarchical models. So we allow everybody to have sort of their own set of preference parameters, but we assume that these preferences are coming from like a common distribution that describes how everybody is a little bit different. And so that's a good balance between allowing heterogeneity and still keeping things together. The large portion of preference heterogeneity cannot be explained, and that's why we want to allow for this so-called random effect, this distribution that explains that everybody has sort of their own set of preferences. There's a certain amount of variance in preferences there, and we don't even try to explain that. Part of that variance, that heterogeneity, can be explained, but the largest part typically cannot be explained. It's just that everybody has different tastes. So once we've estimated the model, we can then understand the relative value of different features. So for instance, the value of different brand names. Then we can use that to predict demand. So what if you launch a new product? So if our brand X launches a new product that combines this type of chocolate with this type of nut and fruit. And then we can see, okay, how much share of choice do we get? And so how much market share might we be able to capture in the long run? We can then also do breakdowns by subgroups, so we can split our respondents based on characteristics of these respondents and see, okay, who would like this new choice alternative most. That can also then help us to, create our advertising, because we would try to actually reach those customers that are most interested in our new choice alternative. And so basically this prediction model is often packaged into a decision tool that managers then can use to play around with it and see if their new product ideas, if they would actually catch on. So this is a screenshot from an interactive decision tool. And so basically you can go into this decision tool. There's a configuration tab here. It says product 1, 2, 3, and so on. So you can click on these products and then you can configure each of these products in terms of the ingredients that go in, and then it will directly compute like a preference share. So for random person, like what's the probability of choosing each of these different product alternatives. So you can put in your products, a competitor's products, a new product that you imagine creating, and then just see, okay, how successful would this be on the market. So, a couple of extensions. Well, you can try to to achieve more realism. So you would try to explain the heterogeneity. Why do some people like this? Why do some people like that? You can model consideration sets. So maybe some brands you wouldn't even consider, right? Because you're boycotting a manufacturer, for instance, or there's something that you're allergic to, or there are other reasons why you would systematically rule out choosing certain choice alternatives. You could look into variety seeking, so especially in chocolate bars, right? What is the tendency to buy different flavors in the same shopping trip? You can go beyond just maximizing utility and look at minimizing regret. Well, other things might be, how can we, do policy simulations or counterfactuals? So, how many unique products should we offer? Right? Can we give up on light pricing or not? And also a little bit more advanced questions that might require a little bit of additional information, but they might still be based on, conducting a conjoint experiment. Lots of more applications here to consider. Like in healthcare, you could look at preferences for different treatments, or they can also be applied in litigation to actually see, okay, how much is actually the damage from a patent violation. All right, thanks for tuning in. And this was about 15 minutes if you subtract my introduction. Of course, very, very brief, probably a little bit too fast, but this was a challenge. Try to explain conjoint analysis in 15 minutes.